David Kupelian, author of How Evil Works, has studied extensively the moral decay experienced by America over the last 50 years. How could one homosexual judge overturn the will of 7 million Californians who voted against legalizing same-sex marriage? How have moral values in our nation been totally reversed? David Kupelian joins us to discuss these critical issues today on Politics and Religion.
Look, there are two things I don't discuss: politics and religion.
In my house, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion.
I'll talk to you about anything except politics and religion.
I never talk about politics and religion.
Politics determines how we'll live here on earth. Religion determines how we'll live forever. I'm Irvin Baxter. I think it's time we talk about it. It will be a special day here on Politics and Religion. Our special guest is Mr. David Kupelian. He is an award-winning journalist, managing editor of online news giant WorldNetDaily.com, as well as its monthly news magazine, Whistleblower. His best-selling book, The Marketing of Evil, is currently in its 12th printing. He is the proud father of several children, and his wife lives in the Northwest. We're so glad to welcome today a marvelous individual doing a great work to help our nation and the world, Mr. David Kupelian. David, nice to have you on Politics and Religion today.
Hey, Erwin. Thanks for a very kind introduction.
Well, it's so nice to have you, and you're dealing in a field that not very many people have touched, David, as you know. But it's a critically needed field. And I just want to start right out of the gate by asking this. In almost every state, if not in every state in the Union, homosexual acts were criminal up until around 1960. From then until now, we have experienced a massive moral shift. Now it's almost a crime to say anything against homosexuality. How in the world have we shifted so far, so fast in 50 years from one extreme clear to the other? Explain it to me.
It's stunning, isn't it? That's what the marketing of evil is really about, is telling that story. But in a nutshell, we have lost our way. The values that guided America, very simply, which we call Judeo-Christian values, biblical values, traditional American values, it's all the same thing. The core values that underpin Western civilization for millennia and America for centuries, we threw it all out the window about 50 or 60 years ago. And having done that, and there's a whole backstory to how we did that. It wasn't some natural evolution. We were conned into doing it. We were seduced into doing it, and it goes into the whole 60s sexual liberation and gay liberation and women's liberation and animal liberation. Whatever happened to Ozzie and Harriet 10 years before? What happened to Father Knows Best? How do we go crazy in the 60s? And that's a whole story about basically America, that the moral foundations of America came under a full-blown assault in the 1960s. We didn't know it. We just saw, the flower people and the British rock invasion and LSD, and we had no clue what was really going on then. But on the college campuses, basically there was a revolution with a capital R going on in America. It was this is a scary thing to say, it was a Marxist revolution. Yes, I'm using the M word. That's what the people that did it called themselves, so we'll use their own label. And it's too long to go into the whole history of that, but there have been many books written about this. This is not my opinion. This is a matter of public record, a matter of history, how all of our major institutions, our public schools, our colleges, our our foundations and philanthropies, the news and entertainment media, all fell to the far left. And then in 2008, they got the last piece of the puzzle, which was the government, when they elected Barack Obama as president. But basically, we threw out traditional biblical values, which included biblical morality when it comes to sex, which is basically, hey, sex is sacred and is reserved for marriage, period. Okay, that's what we all believed for millennia. We threw it all out the window, as I said, in the 1960s.
Well, okay, David, but here's what I feel like I need to personally know. What are the root causes? What did we quit doing that we were doing before then, or what did we start doing that we weren't doing before then? This is not a little shift. This is a radical, turn everything upside down shift here. I mean, when you talk about being a criminal offense to commit a homosexual act in every state in this nation in 1960 till today, you can almost be arrested for saying a word against it. How do we go through such a flip-flop? What were the root causes? Did the preachers quit preaching? What happened? Do you have a handle on what happened? Because here's my thinking. If we can figure out what happened, maybe we could reverse it and go back down the same road the other direction and recover some things.
Yeah, it's all the above. The thing is, when you're talking, Irwin, about specifically about the changes in our laws dealing with sexual morality and stuff, you can go right to Alfred Kinsey. Alfred Kinsey was the Indiana University scientist who, before he changed all of our sexual laws, was famous for studying the gall wasp. That was his claim to fame. He was a zoologist. He studied wasps. But then he decided that humans were just like animals, like wasps, and he did a famous sexual survey where he found that 1 in 10 of us are homosexual, and that men, up to 37% of men have had homosexual experience, that 95% of men, now we're talking about, this was 1948, so World War II era, greatest generation Americans, okay, conservative, traditional values, 95% of them were sexual criminals, according to the laws of the day. In other words, they were adulterers or whatever. Now, the fact of the matter is, Alfred Kinsey has been proven by multiple biographers to have been a certified sexual psychopath who set out to undermine and to revolutionize and change America's, not just its thinking about sexuality, but the laws. There's the answer to your question about the laws. That was his, I'm talking about even biographies that are favorable to Kinsey, okay, admit that this is what he set out to do. It was the worst junk science of the last 100 years. He went and he interviewed prisoners. He interviewed prostitutes. He interviewed sexual offenders and pretended that he was interviewing normal, middle-class, as I say, greatest generation Americans. In other words, out-and-out scientific fraud. His sampling was completely skewed toward, perverse, dysfunctional, even criminal people. But he came up with these findings. By the way, his most famous and notorious finding is that children are sexual from birth, and to do that, he actually had pedophiles. And by the way, there's no opinion on what I'm saying. You can even go to sexual behavior in the human male and look up table 34 or 35. It's right there in the book itself. He had pedophiles sexually molest little children down to the age of 2 months. You heard me right, 2 months of age. Infants and toddlers, I don't even want to say what they did to them. This is the family show. But basically, sexually molested in every way possible these little children with stopwatches to test their, sexual responsiveness. And the thing is that it is illegal under any circumstances whatsoever to have this kind of contact with infants and toddlers. There's no circumstance where it's not a heinous felony. And yet, there are the charts right there in his book, Sexual Behavior of the Human Male, and it took 30 years for anybody to even notice. This was an international bestseller. And finally, Judith Reisman in the early 80s said, excuse me, knock, 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 what I just said. It's illegal to do this. Who authorized the testing of these children? Where were the parents? Who are the pedophiles? What is going on here? But to this day, there's very little traction on something that is obviously a terrible mass crime, because this is the scientific underpinning for the whole Playboy philosophy, the whole field of sexology, the whole sexual liberation movement, including gay liberation. You have to have a scientific, underpinning for it, and that's what Kinsey provided. So even though it's completely insane and completely proven to be not just junk science, but criminally insane, okay, nobody wants to touch it because they don't want to mess around with the huge, you're talking about everything from Viagra and the other drugs to pornography to the whole, as I say, gay rights movement, which is very mainstream now. Nobody wants to touch it because Kinsey is the one who said 1 in 10 are homosexual. There is literally no evidence whatsoever for that. It's more like 2%. Okay, but these myths still persist. So that's where it got started with the changing of the laws on sex.
So you're pointing out something here that many times surveys that are taken are skewed, and yet they acquire powerful propaganda value. For example, I read something recently where a majority of Americans now favor same-sex marriage. Well, I knew that wasn't true because what's it been, 30 or 31 states that have been allowed to vote on same-sex marriage, and out of 31 states, 31 have voted it down. And so for a piece of propaganda to come from a place like CNN or some of the major networks and say that the majority of Americans now favor same-sex marriage, and yet at the same time we've thrown it out the window every single time, it's a piece of propaganda.
Right. It totally depends how you ask the question. In fact, WND, where I serve as managing editor, does a monthly poll. I'm talking about a scientific poll, just like the Harris poll and all the big polls. And we did one this month on gay issues. And we asked two questions that were basically the same question, worded differently. And one question was, what do you think about don't ask, don't tell? Should it stay? Should it be repealed? And you had 40% of respondents favoring having gays in the military. But when we reworded the question to ask this how it was worded, should American soldiers and sailors be required to bunk and shower with open homosexuals? Now, that's exactly the same question as the first question, because nobody's talking about making separate housing or, shower facilities for homosexuals. That's not going to happen. They've already specified that. So when we ask it that way, and it's kind of graphic and clear, only 27% said yes. But they said 40% said yes to the previous question. It's the same group of people. It's the same phone call, the same survey, but depending on how the question is asked, you get a different answer.
Well, we are facing huge challenges. Let me ask you this, David, and I'm trying to put this in a way that really boils everything down to its essence. But if a person defends the gay agenda and says that the gay lifestyle is normal, that they're born that way, don't we have to, in order to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, in order to repeal DOMA, which now President Obama has asked the Congress to do, don't we have to throw the Bible in the trash can and say it's a worthless piece of trash? I want you to answer that when we get back. We're up against a break right now. Our guest today is Mr. David Kupelian, and he is the author of How Evil Works.
Endtime Ministries presents End of the Age, a 30-minute commercial-free TV show hosted by Irvin Baxter. Every Monday, End of the Age airs on the Church Channel at 9 p.m., Daystar at 10 p.m., and on TBN every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m., all Central Standard Time. On End of the Age, Irvin depicts how modern issues like an establishment of a one-world government, the religion of Islam, a coming World War III, and more line up so clearly with Bible prophecies written over 2,000 years ago. To get tomorrow's news today, be sure to tune into End of the Age every Monday on the Church Channel at 9 p.m., Daystar at 10 p.m., and on TBN every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m., all Central Standard Time. Visit endtime.com for more details or call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463.
The Bible prophesies about 4 great spirits which control the action